Thank you very much. Okay. So we are starting right about now. First off, I really want to welcome every one of us to our weekly Pfander Nigeria apologetics and polemics training. We've been having this for a couple of months right now. In fact, we started having this training since about last year when Dr. J came to Nigeria, and then we wanted to have a follow-up to all that has been talked to us. So we've been having this weekly program since last year. And today, we are so pleased and so privileged to have within us Dr. J. Smith, and Dr. J actually does not need any form of introduction for us because we've been watching him online on YouTube, and we're also privileged to have him right here in Nigeria last year. And well, if you're joining us for the very first time, Dr. J is actually the coordinator of Pfander Films, and he's done a lot of debates and a lot of talks, and he also actually run a program in Veritas University, the MAPI course, and the program is actually ongoing at the moment. It's a master course in apologetics and polemics, especially to Islam. So that is all I will say about Dr. J. And because he has a lot to share with us today, I wouldn't want to take much of the time doing all of the introduction, but I think we are good to go with that. Now, I want to say a couple of things. While he's presenting, if you have questions, you could actually, as our custom is, you can put in the question in the comment section. All right. What you could do is that you just type in question in capital letter and then let it be followed by your question. And the reason why we usually do that is to make sure that we are able to distinguish between the questions that you have and the comment that could, be posted in the comment section as well. So I just want to make sure that we take that out of the way, or we take care of that. So with that said, I think we are so blessed. Just like I said, the topic of tonight's discussion training is the canonization of the Quran. How, was the Quran canonized? And I tell you, Dr. J is going to bless us with the word of experience that he has on this particular topic. So with that said, I think, Dr. J, over to you right now. Let's have you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Corredi. And good to see all of you here. Some of you I know from the course, others I've met and when I was in Nigeria back in October, and I may be coming again in October this year or November this year back to Nigeria. So we're going to go right into this. Let's get right into the canonization. And I've got a PowerPoint here, so I'm going to share screen and introduce it as you see there on your screen. Now, when you talk about canonization, I'll define terms so we know what we're talking about so that we don't get confused. But the topic, what we're going to do, I'm going to be using a PowerPoint that I used 3 weeks ago, same PowerPoint that we did in our talk for the MAPI course. And I'm just going to be going through it. There's an awful lot of slides, so I'll be going through them quickly to try to get you up and running. We need to define what we mean by canon. And when you look at the definitions in the Free Dictionary, it's defined as all the writings of an institution that are accepted as genuine. And that's a pretty good definition right there. Webster goes on and says to attribute authoritative sanction by an ecclesiastical authority. Collins defines it as to consider or treat sacrosanct or holy. Corredi, if you could mute everybody, you have the power to do that. Just mute everybody and we continue on.
Yeah, just a minute. I'm just going to do that right away. Sorry about that.
And hit mute everybody.
Okay. All right. That is done. And I've just unmuted you. I've just unmuted you right now. So you can go ahead, Dr. J.
Dr. J is still muted.
Oh, okay, so Dr. J, you need to unmute.
Yeah. No, you are still muted, sir. You can unmute. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So when we go to...
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, when we go to the Collins Dictionary, to consider or treat as sacrosanct or holy that which they believe. When you look at this, you can see in chapter 85, verse 21 to 22, it's very clear that that the Quran itself makes this claim, and that it is immutable, that it is the canon. In other words, it is the category that everybody must follow. It is the absolute of what under the undergirding or the authority for all Muslims. The canon would be those set of books, the 114 surahs, the 114 books that we have today. And chapter 85 makes it clear that that the Quran itself is inimitable. And that's why this whole thing of canon that we talk about makes no sense to Muslims. Because if you have a canon, that's a human institution. It's humans that decide what books are not. And for Islam, there is no human intervention. There can be no humans that choose or unchoose, since the Quran has always existed. It's above choice. It's above human choice. If it's eternal, how can humans therefore have any diktat, have any authority to choose or not choose what books belong to that set of, or that canon? So canon by definition is a human institution. Consequently, if the Quran is eternal and humans cannot therefore have any choice in the matter, then there is no such thing as a canon. The canon has always been, and it was that which was revealed to Muhammad. Now, of course, you're going to see, we're going to shut that together. We're going to shut that down right through this hour. So let's go right into, because what they claim is, since it's uncreated, and you've heard, we've said this many times, there are 4 claims that Muslims make about the Quran. It is uncreated, therefore it has no human intervention. It always exists in heaven on these clay tablets, and since it exists in these clay tablets, it needs to be sent down, which was done between 610 and 632 via the angel Gabriel to a man named Muhammad there on earth. But it was completed in its written form. So though it was revealed to Muhammad over that 22-year period, he never wrote it down, which is rather inept, you would suggest. Why would he never write something down if it's the most important document in the history of mankind? That had to be done after he died, first by Abu Bakr in 632, and then a second time by Uthman in 652, 20 years later. And then the 4th claim they make is that it is unchanged. Since that time, since 652 till today, 1400 years later, there has been no change. Because once you change it, it's no longer an eternal book. It's no longer uncreated. It can no longer be inimitable. So you can see these 4 claims, uncreated, sent down, completed, unchanged, are the claims they make. Now, just to underline that, I'm going to show you, these are friends of mine. These are well-known debaters, Muslim debaters. This is their claim, and they're going to say it. Rather than me speak it, let them say it. So let's see what they say about it.
Our claim, the Muslim claim, has been for the last 14 centuries that the Quran is absolutely word by word preserved. Word by word.
And frankly, you know, the Quran has been preserved, we believe, word for word, letter for letter.
Whatsoever that the Quran has been preserved to the letter, to the dot, and to the sound when we talk about this.
Their Quran is exactly the same. The Quran shall remain uncorrupted, untouched, and unchallenged until the day of
The
judgment.
Quran that we read is exactly the one that was given to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Word for word, letter by letter, surah by
It
surah.
was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ and preserved word by word, letter by letter, harf by harf. Even the pronunciation is preserved.
Okay, so it's pretty
Our
clear.
claim,
Sorry, it's pretty clear that they are all speaking from the same sheet. So why do they make these claims? It's rather ridiculous, isn't it? Word for word, letter by letter, harf by harf, dot by dot, vowel by vowel. That doesn't make sense. We would suggest that that doesn't make sense. Why would they make these claims? They have to. They have no other choice, because it's the Quran that makes these claims. It's the Quran itself that says very clearly that for instance, chapter 85, verse 21 to 22, that we've already just looked at, that this glorious Quran inscribed in the preserved tablet. Now, preserved, if you look at any exegete, if you look at Ibn Kathir or Baidawi, Zamakhshari, Suyuti, any of the great exegetes, they would define preserved as eternal. uncreated. So that's why this preserved tablet that exists in heaven, that has always existed, according to all the exegetes, is that inimitable, unquestioned book. Now, what they would then say is that it's because, in chapter 10, verse 15, it's because of this that no man can change it. Bring us a Quran other than this or change it. Say, it is not for me to change it on my own accord. This is repeated in chapter 18, verse 27, where it says, and recite what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord. None can change his words. No one, you, me, nobody, no human can do that, because it is preserved. It is eternal preserved. How can humans have the audacity to think that they could even change one word or one letter? And on top of that, the reason they cannot change it is because Allah himself has preserved it. Chapter 15, verse 9, we, verily, it is we who have sent down the Quran, and surely we will guard it. So Allah himself, God Almighty, will make sure that no man can change one word and one letter. And that's why they have to make this claim. Don't blame them for this claim. So, yet men have chosen numerous Qurans. The Quran has gone through numerous revisions over numerous periods by numerous men. Thus, it has been canonized many times. Take a look at those 8 Qurans that I have in my hand right there. I have a 9th now. So I'm up to 9 Qurans myself, all of them different. No 2 are alike. And we're going to talk about that today. So this is why we need to introduce this material. This is why you need to know it and why you need to use it there in Nigeria. So how was the Quran canonized? How was it put together? How was it made into a book of 114 surahs that we have today? Is it eternal? Has it always been? Was there 114 books, word for word, letter for letter, like we have today, from the time of Abu Bakr, from the time of Uthman, or even beyond that, from the time of Muhammad himself? Dr. Shadi Nasser, that man you see there, is considered to be probably the world's leading authority on the Quran. He has a PhD from Harvard University. He teaches at Harvard University today, and he is the one that has done the most work. And he talks about 5 canons. And these are the 5 that he talked about, 5 different periods where the Quran was put together. Canon number 1 would be the time of Uthman that we've just talked about. Canon number 2 would be the time of Ibn Mujahid. We'll get into that as to what I'm talking about. That would be 936. Canon number 3 would be Al-Shatibi in 1194. Canon number 4 would be Al-Jazari in 1429. Canon number 5, then his last one, would be the canon of Ali al-Husaini al-Haddad in 1924. So those are the 5 canons he refers to, and we'll go with his 5 canons. However, I'm going to add one more. So I'm going to come up with, 2 more. I'm going to come up with 2 more, because there's 2 more that he missed. And it's not that he missed it, he just didn't want to consider it, because there's no way you can unpack it. And I would suggest that the first canon is not the canon of Uthman, but the canon of Abu Bakr in 632, 20 years early. Then you have the canon of Uthman in 652. Then you have the canon of Ibn al-Malik and al-Hajjaj. Now that's a whole new one that he doesn't even introduce, because he doesn't even know about this. I don't think that Nasser knows about canon number 3. This is coming out in the last 2 years, and it's becoming really mainstream by a scholar named Dr. Stephen Shoemaker, who I agree with. And Al-Fadi and I have put up 60, well, we're in the process of putting up 60 different YouTubes, uploading them onto his site and my site on these different canons, including this one here, canon number 3. Canon number 4 then would be Ibn Mujahid 936. Canon 5, Al-Shatibi 1194. Canon number 6, Al-Jazari in 1429. And canon number 7, the one of Muhammad ibn Ali al-Husaini al-Haddad in 1924, 100 years ago. Those are the 7 canons. So I'm going to introduce the 5 of Shadi Nasser and 2 more, the 2 more with Abu Bakr and Abdul Malik. So let's go ahead and let's get into canon number 1. Now, canon number 1 is Abu Bakr. this is the one that I like to put up because to know that Muslims do know this, and this is not new. And Shadi Nasser does know about this, but he doesn't want to deal with it. And this is from Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 509. And here you have al-Bukhari, referring to this first recitation that was revealed, this recitation from Muhammad, that when he died in 632, he had not written it down. And a group of Muslims went up to Yamama and had a battle up there. And in the Battle of Yamama, many of them were killed. And of course, when they came back then from Yamama, it became a crisis. Abu Bakr was the caliph at that time. His good friend Umar were there in the throne room. And so they brought in Zayd ibn Thabit. Zayd ibn Thabit was Muhammad's secretary. They brought him into the throne room, and they said, because of all these 70 that were killed who had memorized the Quran, their memory goes with them. Once they're dead, there's no way of retrieving what they had memorized. So as a result, we want you to write the Quran down, to put it into a codex form. Now, stop and think. That's important because that shows you that the memorized Quran is not good enough. You have to have it written down. Otherwise, how do we know whose memory it is, what memory it is, or what happens when their memory goes? So obviously this is a crisis. They had to write it down. Now, Zayd ibn Thabit did not want to do that. And he says, what can I do? How can I do something the Prophet didn't do? All I'm saying is out there on the right. Look on the right. There is in an Arabic, Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 509. And there's the English translation on the left side, word for word, letter for letter. That is word for word. That is letter for letter translation. I'm just summarizing what it's saying there. So he refused to do it at first, but Umar and Abu Bakr insisted. So finally he relented. And what he did, he went to start collecting it. He collected what he could find from palm leaves, from white stones, and from the memory of those men who had been left behind, those who were not killed at the Battle of Yamama. And he compiled it together, and he noticed that there was one man, a man named Abi Khuzaima al-Ansari, who had one verse, actually 2 verses, that he had not found elsewhere. And that's chapter 9, verse 128 to 129 in the Quran today. So here is one witness of only 2 verses that he includes in the Quran today. And this became the first canon then. This is the first written text. He gives it to Abu Bakr, who gives it to Umar, who gives it to his daughter named Hafsa, who had been a wife of Muhammad. And what does she do with this canon, this first canon? She sticks it under her bed. Now, you might say, how stupid can you get? Why would you put the greatest revelation in the history of mankind, the first revelation to actually compile the entire revelation of God himself, why would you stick it under a bed? Shouldn't you be making copies of it? Copies of copies and printing them out and having different scribes, Zayd ibn Thabit with all his scribes, writing it out by hand, and because they didn't have printing presses then, and sending it out like Uthman's going to do in 20 years. Shouldn't you have done this in 632? Absolutely, they should have done this. So you can see this is really curious why she stuck it on her bed and forgot about it, which means she didn't even read it. She didn't even care about it. Basically, she was just keeping it, holding it for them, so in case there was an emergency, then it could be brought forth. And that's exactly what happened. There was an emergency. 20 years later, let's change. Before we get there, though, let's ask some questions. So here are the questions I want to ask. Concerning this whole event, why in the world did God, in his wisdom, why did he reveal a new book? He already had the Old and New Testament, all the 66 books of the Old and New Testament written in Hebrew and in Greek. Why in the world would he now choose another book, a subsidiary book, a subsequent revelation in a language that could not even accommodate it? Because take a look, Arabic was in its infancy in the 7th century. It only, in a written form, it only had 16 letters. Today it has 28. But back then, in the 7th century, it only had 16 letters, which means it was obviously that it could not accommodate God's holy word. So why would God, in his wisdom, choose this hopeless language to reveal his revelation? Remember, there were no diacritical marks. There were no vowelization in the 7th century. There is no dots above and below the lines, and there is no dhamma or kasra or fatha. That did not exist. That was created in the 8th and 9th century for this very reason, because of this very problem. So that's the first question. Why did God choose a man also to reveal his revelation who could not read or write? According to every Muslim, Muhammad was illiterate. He could not read or write. If he's giving the greatest preservation of the book for all of mankind, for heaven's sakes, why didn't God use somebody who could read it or even write it down? Going on for other questions. Number 3. Listen, Muhammad could easily have learned to read or write. It's not hard to read or write Arabic. It only has 28 letters. I learned those 28 letters, and I learned how to read them in 2 weeks when I took Arabic back there in London. He already knew Arabic. I don't know Arabic, but I can read and write it. It's easy to read and write it. Anybody really can do it in 2 weeks, or even faster. I was a little slow. Many people could do it much quicker. He had 20 years to read and write it. To me, that doesn't make any sense. And what about his secretary? Listen, secretaries, what do? Well, they write. Isn't that what a secretary does? Isn't that their job? Their job is to write down what the person says. So obviously, Zayd ibn Thabit could read and write it. If he couldn't, then what was he doing writing it down in 632 after Muhammad died? He had 20 years to write it down. That's rather inept, or you might say rather lazy of him not to have written it down almost immediately. Number 4. Why in the world, having given this copy by Zayd ibn Thabit, having been given this copy in 632, why didn't he make copies of it immediately? Why did he give it to Hafsa, who put it under her bed? He should have sent it out if this is the final copy. What's the purpose of writing a text? Why did he even commission Zayd ibn Thabit to write it down if it wasn't going to be used? And made copies of it immediately and sent to all the different provinces. And the 5 provinces that we do know, there were more than that, but the 5 provinces we do know were Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, which is Baghdad today, and Damascus. Those 5. Now, if we do know that at that time there were other provinces. Not only do we have Basra, Kufa, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur, there would be actually 9. So they should have sent 9 copies to 9 provinces, but let's just go with 5. We do know the 5. I'll get to this a little bit later to show you what I mean. Now, number 5, if 1,000 people, but Muslims say thousands died at Yamama. That's why they had to write the Quran down. No. According to traditions, only 70 died. 70 died, not thousands. But nonetheless, think this through. Muslims, the comeback they always say is we don't need a canon. We don't need a manuscript. We don't need to have those original manuscripts because we can memorize it. And they memorized it in the 7th century. And it was because of that memorization that we are therefore can trust the Quran we have today. Obviously, if memorization was that good, then why is it when only 70 were killed at the Battle of Yamama, this became a crisis? Doesn't this prove that there were very few who actually knew the Quran? 70 is not that many. And then does this also prove that this caused a real crisis with just 70 who died? Here was the crisis. That's why they had to write it down. You wouldn't have to write it down if this was not a crisis. And doesn't that moreover prove that memorization is not good enough to preserve the Quran, as Muslims constantly claim today? Just throw it right back in their laps whenever they say, it doesn't matter. They memorize it. Oh, if they memorize it, then why have you write it down? Why would there be such a crisis? What was the difficulty here? So obviously, this does not run. Now, that was canon number 1. Let's go to canon number 2. So now we come 20 years later. Abu Bakr has died. Umar has taken over from 632. Abu Bakr was from 632 to 634. Then you have Umar from 634 to 644. And now you have Uthman who takes over. Umar is killed. Uthman takes over from 644. And he goes to 654. So he goes for the next 10 years. But meanwhile, before he is killed in 654, there is another battle. So this is battle number 2, and this is a battle way up in Azerbaijan. And in 652, now before we get into this whole story, let me just talk about these 2 theories that we have concerning canons number 2 and 3. Theory number 1, and this is the Noldeki-Shwali paradigm. This is the traditional account. This is what most people think. This is what most people believe. This is what you've been told. This is what I've also just gone through already, is that Uthman compiled and thus canonized the Quran in 652. And that is the Noldeki-Shwali paradigm. These are 2 German scholars who kind of really pushed it in the last century, in the 1900s. They really pushed this idea that Uthman, and still used today. It's what everybody, in fact, it is still the theory that all Muslims believe, and most of you believe, because this is the first time you've heard of any other. So we'll call it the Noldeki-Shwali paradigm, that Uthman compiled the Quran. Then you have Shoemakers, who just came out in 2022 with a whole new theory. So it's a brand new theory, and it's called the New Historical Critical Account. And it's the belief is that you have Abdul Malik and Abdul Malik, who is the caliph in 685 to 705. He was one that came up and decided he needed a Quran. He needed to write down a Quran because he needed to create a book for the Ishmaelites, for those who he represented. And he, along with his governor named Al-Hajjaj, compiled the Quran in its first form, in its initial form. And that became the canon. So that's the third canon, you might say. Now, let's look at Shwali in Noldeki. This is the Noldeki one. It follows the traditional account. And that is that Uthman, he now is in power. He's been in power since 644. So this is 8 years later. He sends up a contingent of Muslims to battle against the Azerbaijanis, who are causing a problem in his frontier. They go up to Azerbaijan and they battle against the Azerbaijanis. They're joined by other Muslims from Iraq and other Muslims from Syria. So the ones from Syria, the ones from Iraq come and they join together. They battle against the Azerbaijanis. They win the battle. And after they win the battle, they go to a mosque to pray, which is normal. After you win the battle, you go to a mosque and pray. And they're at the mosque, they go to pray, but as they're praying, they hear different recitations. They hear different references. They hear different groups of Muslims praying different ways. And so they hear one group of Arabic over here, and they hear another Quran over here. And as a result, they start going to blows. They start battling with each other. Bang, 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 bang. Because they realize that this cannot be the same Quran. It's obviously a different Quran. And so the Syrians and the Iraqis are fighting against the Medinans, who are from the Hijaz, from Arabia, and they're all fighting over the different recitations. Well, Uzaima, who is in charge of all of the Arabs, comes back down to Medina. He is angered by what he heard and by these fights that he's having. He goes into the throne room there in Medina. I'm kind of giving you the story in summary form of what Sahih al-Bukhari is saying. He goes to Uthman and he says, we must do something. There's an emergency. I'm hearing a different Quran. We came to blows. There's different Qurans, different recitations. They're not the same Quran that I have understood. Therefore, we must make the Quran as one. Make it only one text. And of course, Uthman agrees. So he wakes up Zayd ibn Thabit, who's been asleep for 20 years. No, that's me saying that. And he tells Zayd ibn Thabit to get that copy that he gave to Hafsa, which is sitting under her bed, to bring it out and to use that as a model and to rewrite the Quran in the Qurayshi dialect. Okay, hold on. Qurayshi dialect. So he is then given the help of 3 others, Zubair, Alas, and Ibn Hisham, to write it in the Qurayshi dialect. And why? So if they have any dispute amongst them, this is the dialect that they are to use. And then he took that copy that Zayd ibn Thabit, so this is copy number 2. This is canon number 2 now. And he sends it to 9 different provinces. We already read those provinces. We'll get into them again. Now, what about all the other ones? the ones that disagreed. Well, he took all the other manuscripts, partial or full ones, that disagreed with that final Qurayshi dialect or that final Qurayshi copy, and he burned them, destroyed them, annihilated them. Now, there was one verse, chapter 33, verse 23. Remember, we already had in the one with Abu Bakr, chapter 9, verse 128 to 129. Now we had another third verse that he suddenly realizes that he didn't have before. So 20 years later, he comes across another verse written by Khuzaimah ibn Thabit al-Ansari, and he adds that to the Quran. So now we have 3 new verses that have been added, 2 in 632 and another one in 652. And then he sends it out to those 5 cities. Now, I have a huge number of problems here. Here's my questions. This is canon number 2, right? Now we're in 652. This is from Al-Bukhari, volume 5, hadith number 5, volume 6, hadith number 510. The other one was volume 6, hadith number 509. This is the next page. Number 1, here's my first question. How could there be dialectical differences in a 7th century Quran? In order to have dialectical differences, any of you understand Arabic, you will know that in order to, if it's a dialectical differences, if you say, like we say in English, you say potato, I say potato, you say tomato, I say tomato, potato, potato, tomato, tomato. Why can't we all get along? I mean, it's a great little dilly, but that's exactly what we're talking about. Pronunciation is sacrosanct. You pronounce different things depending on what you read. But the pronunciation is in vowelization. Potato, potato, tomato, tomato. That is vowelization. The different vowels you pronounce differently. So how can you have different pronunciations in a written text in the 7th century, an Arabic written text in the 7th century, when there were no vowels? See, Arabic is like Hebrew. There's no vowels there. It is just consonants. Like Hebrew, you put the vowels in as you need to. The same thing in Arabic. But in Arabic in the 7th century, vowels had yet to be created. There is no vowelization. So you can't have pronunciation differences in the 7th century in a written text. In an oral form, yes. A spoken, yes. You potato, potato, tomato, tomato. Yes, you can say that, but how would you write that down in a consonantal text? Not in the 7th century. Dialects, therefore, could not have been written down so that you could read them differently that early, okay? These were only introduced in the 8th century, and they were not finalized for another century later. They didn't get finalized into the 3 vowels that we have today and the 5 dots that we have today for the different letters until the 9th century. So that's the first problem. All right, here's another problem. Why in the world did Uthman burn all the other copies? Listen, you can't burn oralization. You can't burn pronunciation, not if it's not written down. The only thing you can burn is that which is written down. You have to have a codex. You have to have pen and you have to have, paper and ink. You have to burn something. You can't burn someone's pronunciation. You can't burn orality. You can't burn the spoken word. It has to be the written word. So these have to be books, if this is correct. Now remember, Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 510, is written by Al-Bukhari. When did Al-Bukhari live? He died in 870. That's the late 9th century. Therefore, everything we're reading about what Abu Bakr did and Uthman did are all written in the 9th century, redacted back to the 7th century, and that's the problem. He was writing about what he knew in the 9th century. In the 9th century, there would be vowelization. In the 9th century, yes, the vowels were all in place. So were the consonant. 28 letters did exist in the 9th century, and he didn't realize that 200 years earlier in the 7th century, these did not exist. So when he was writing this down, he assumed that what he knew is the same thing that was happening at the time of Uthman. But he's 200 years later. He didn't think and didn't realize about his own history, as many people and Muslims today don't understand that. So you need to show this. Show Muslims that this makes no sense. In the 9th century, it makes sense, but not in the 7th century. So this is a redaction, putting back to an earlier time that which could not exist. Number 3, Muslims claim that they burned because of different dialects. I've already gone through that. How could Muhammad have known these northern dialects? Hold on a minute. Muhammad spent his whole life in Mecca, Medina, down in the Hijaz, way in the south. These dialects are way from Iraq and from Syria. These are 1,200 miles away, these dialects. There is no way he would have known about them. Islam hadn't even left the Hijaz by the time he died. They hadn't even gone that far north yet. So how would he have known about these dialectical differences? Remember, as we're going to see later on, you're going to see what dialects we're talking about. We're talking about 30 different dialects, 30 different, and we're going to see even more now because we've got some new material that's just come in the last 2 weeks. You guys are getting it. You guys and gals are getting it. Even as we go along, we're going to have to rechange it as we go. We know that of the 30 later qira'ats, 22 came from up north. 22 of the 30 came from up north, and 12 from Kufa alone. Kufa is what is today Baghdad, or just south of Baghdad. So how can there have been 12 different dialects in one small town of only 200 people? Remember, we don't even know that Mecca exists. In fact, we don't believe there was any Mecca. But in Medina, where this is taking place, there was only 200 people that early. It was called Yathrib at that time, not Medina. All right. So number 4, the fact that Zayd ibn Thabit came up with Surah chapter 33, verse 23, with one man, a man named Zuzaima ibn Thabit al-Ansari, proves that the Quran was not even complete in 632. Could there have been many other surahs he missed? Besides the fact that he came up with 2 20 years earlier in chapter 9, verse 120 and 129. And what about the material which was lost with those who were killed in the Battle of Yamama in 632? That's not in the Quran. That went with them. When they died, it died with them. If there was a second Quran in 652, why are there now so many Qurans today in 2024? Okay, can you see this just gets better and better? And if the 5 to 9 copies were made from each province, where are they today? Where is there even one? If they have 1 copy sent to every one of the provinces, Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus, those are the 5. And then what about Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Misapur? So, questions about the codices. Let's just look at these provinces. See, according to the standard Islamic tradition, standard Islamic narrative, there were 9 provinces at the time of Uthman. Here we go. There is Medina. There is Mecca. Over here is Basra. There is Baghdad or Kufa. And there is Damascus. Okay, do you see them all there? Those are the 5. Those we do know about. Those are no one really questions. Those are the 5. But there are many more provinces at that time. And we sent them to every other province. What about Alexandria? I'm sorry, Jerusalem, sorry. What about Cairo? What about Alexandria? What about Aden? What about Herat? And what about Nishapur? Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. 11 different provinces, 9 are pictured at right. They would only been 1,400 years old. We have 1,700-year-old New Testament. All of those cities outside of Jerusalem are still Islamic today. Even one completed in the 7th century would suffice. I would like to see just one from every one of those provinces. What about other codices? Now, hold on a minute. We're talking about the 7th century. Remember, let's go back to the 7th century because we need to see which cities and which countries the earliest Qurans came from. According to the standard Islamic narrative, I'm not going to make this up. This is what they tell me, all right? So I'm putting a timeline here, and I want you to look along here. According to according to Islamic traditions, not me, Muhammad died in 632. This final Quran that was supposedly in our hands today, the Uthmanic recension, was created in 652. So there you see it on the timeline. Now, he sent 5 copies to 5 cities. Those are the 5 cities he sent them to, right? Mecca, Medina, Basra, Kufa, and Damascus, in the 3 red circles. But later on the 7th century, you have a guy named Ubay ibn Ka'b, and he comes up with a completely different Quran there in Damascus. And that Quran has 116 surahs. There's only 114 in today's Quran. So it has 2 extra surahs. And then another Quran suddenly appears in Kufa, or what is today Baghdad, written by a guy named Ibn Masud, and it has 110. That's 4 less than the Quran we have today. Folks, does that not show you there's a problem here? And then there's another Quran that comes up that it starts to appear, written by Ibn Musa in Basra, and it has hundreds of different variants, though it has 114 surahs. It's not the same Quran that we have written by Zayd ibn Thabit, the original Quran, the canonical Quran, the Quran that Abu Bakr and Uthman, both Abu Bakr and Uthman had Zayd ibn Thabit right, and that would have been there in Yathrib, or what is today Medina. So we now have 4 different Qurans with different surahs. Dr. Arthur Jeffrey, who is the authority back 100 years ago in the 1930s, looked at the Islamic traditions about these 5 different Qurans, and he found 15,000 differences between these 5 Qurans. So can you see, even in the 7th century, there is an enormous amount of problems going on here. So note, there were at least 5 Qurans in the 7th century from Medina, Mecca, Basra, Kufa, Damascus, and Syria. Conclusion, we do not even have one of them today. Not one of them in our hands today. Not one exists. Suggesting that there was no codices at the time of Uthman in 652 AD. They were therefore introduced by Abdul Malik at the turn of the century, about 50 years later, and that then leads us into our third canon. So this is canon number 3. We've done one canon. First canon is Abu Bakr. Second canon is Uthman. Now we have Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik, who is the caliph that ruled between 685 and 705. Remember I talked about the Noldeki Schwalian paradigm, and that was the belief that Uthman was the one that canonized the text. Well, now we have these 2 guys who are the ones that introduced that. Theodore Noldeki enshrined the Sunni account as canonical in 1860. Frederick Schwali agreed with him, though he didn't think there was a first recension with Abu Bakr in 632, only a second Uthmanic recension. John Burton, in 1977, much more recently, also agreed, saying a perfect example of a prevalence of investigation by intuition in this storied collaborative work on the history of the Quran. Alfred Welch, Encyclopedia of Islam, in 1986, so just a few years ago, most of us were living at that time, wrote this: the unanimity with which an official text is attributed to Uthman, in the face of a lack of convincing evidence to the contrary, leads most Western scholars to accept that the Quran we have today, at least in terms of the number and arrangement of the surahs and the basic structure of the consonantal text, goes back to the time of Uthman, under whose authority the official text was produced. So that is the Noldeki Schwali paradigm. And you can see there are many scholars today who still accept that, including most of you, because this is the only one you've ever heard of today and before today, right? But which Uthmanic Quran? Which are they talking about? There are 10 possibilities are referred to within the traditions. You have the Quran of Salim ibn Makil, compiled the Quran in 632. You have Umar, who did it alone without Abu Bakr, collected the first Quran. Then you have another reference in the tradition that Abu Bakr, without Umar, commissioned Zayd ibn Thabit to compile the Quran. And then you have another tradition that says that after Abu Bakr died, this Quran was compiled. So Umar then commissioned Zayd ibn Thabit to compile the Quran after Abu Bakr died. And then another tradition says that Umar asked Abu Bakr to have it compiled, but he refused. So he waits until he dies to have it done. Then another tradition says that both Sunni and Shia sources say it was Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, who did it. And then another one says that Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife, she was the one that had it compiled. Then another tradition that says that 4 companion codices were created, one by Ibn Ka'b in Damascus, another by Ibn Masud in Kufa, another by Abu Musa in Basra, and Al-Aswad in Hims. And then you have a 9th one by Saif ibn Umar, who died in 797, in his book called The Book of Conquest, suggests that there were several competing collections during Uthman's reign, and he authorized a Medinan version and purges the others. And then you have number 10, according to Ibn Shaba in 876. The Quran was compiled before 632 in multiple versions, and Abu Bakr and Umar were only trying to establish the authoritative one amongst them. Now, can you see? That's 10 different traditions, 10 different references, 10 different opinions, 10 different Qurans. So which one are we talking about? Even if you did believe in Uthman, you can see there's so much disagreement amongst the Muslim scholars themselves. Of course, you can see then why there's such a consternation and problem for the Western scholars. John Burton says this, and he talks about this confusion. She says the reports are a mass of confusions, contradictions, and inconsistencies. By their nature, they represent the product of a lengthy process of evolution, accretion, and improvement. They were framed in response to a wide variety of progressing needs. The existence of such reports make it clear that the Muslims were confused. The earliest stage of the traditions on the collection of the Quran did not consist in incompatible attributions of the first collection of to Abu Bakr, to Umar, and to Uthman. So even as late as 1977, Burton is admitting there's a huge amount of confusion concerning even this first recension or these first two. Dr. Patricia Corona, a good friend of mine, could read and write 15 languages. She talks and says that really Western scholars are just mimicking Muslim scholars, contradicting their own textual science of historical science, textual criticism. And here's what she says. Western Islamicists frequently sound like Muslims, usually a Sunni variety, not only in the sense that they accept Sunni information, but also in that they revere it in a manner incompatible with the question mark to which they in principle committed themselves. In other words, the historical critical method. These should be historians. These should be textual theorists. They don't even use their own history or their own critical method. They just mimic what the scholars are saying. This is a compliment to the strength of Sunnism, but it does not do the modern study of its origins and development any good. In other words, we're saying, people, wake up. If you really do believe in textual criticism and historical advocacy for any book, for heaven's sakes, follow the principles that you were taught under and the ones that you teach. You're all scholars. Why aren't you following the principle you use for every other book? Chase Robinson in 2005 talks about that this text took centuries, not just 20 years. And this is what he says. The complicated and protracted process that generated monotheist scriptures in antiquity and late antiquity are generally measured in centuries, or at least several decades. The tradition would have us believe that in the case of Islam, they were telescoped into about 20 years. Are we really to think that within a single generation, God's word moved from individual lines and chapters scribbled on camels, shoulder blades, and rocks to a complete single fixed and authoritative text on papyrus or vellum? It would be virtually unprecedented. It is furthermore unlikely in the light of what we know of early Arabic, the nature of early Arabic script, which only imperfectly described vowels and consonants, and conventions of memorization and reading, which only often privilege memory over written text, would militate against the very rapid production of the fixed and authoritative text that the traditions describe. So he was saying this in 2005, just about 20 years ago. So you can see a real problem here. Claude Guillot out of France says, even the Muslim standard Islamic narrative is not sure what's going on. He says this, because the misadventures detailed about the transmission and codification of the Quran, as both orally delivered and transmitted in writing, are so great, the ancient Muslim narratives on these subjects offer no real clarity about what Uthmanic Codex really means. Secondly, even as Muslims believe that the Quran we have now is the Uthmanic Codex, our analysis of Muslim narratives on the matter does not leave us with the same certainty. Folks, if they're confused, how is it we're so certain is what he's saying. Vivian Comero, she says this, we would not look to these narratives as reporting what really happened. Instead, each of these accounts was produced and transmitted in order to advance a particular set of religious and doctrinal interests, rather than simply to report us a set of facts from the past. Basically, there's an agenda here, folks, is what she's saying. This is what we should expect. Every one of these reports is nothing more than people trying to push their agenda. And that's why do not report them as history. Shoemaker says this, there was a need to standardize these different collections. And he says the earliest efforts to remember and collect Muhammad's words then came not from a Medinan caliph, but in the distant locales of Syria and Iraq, regions that were rich with Jewish and Christian believers and traditions. The early versions were disturbingly different from one another. So much so that the imperial authorities, that would be the caliphs, saw it as essential to get involved and to eliminate these conflicting memories of Muhammad with a standard version. basically what he's saying is you have many different groups there in Syria and Iraq, way up in the north, who have different versions of what they believe the Quran should be. And so you had the caliph himself, Abdul Malik, who commissioned al-Hajjaj to standardize it into one form. But look at the dates. We're talking about the turn of the century, the beginning of the 8th century. Stephen Shoemaker continues this. And he says, it is noteworthy that prior to the enthronement of Abdul Malik's father, Marwan I, Muhammad himself receives no mention at all in the documentary evidence for the early Islamic polity. He is not named by any one of the papyri or inscriptions or coins from this period. We are thus left wondering what his importance was for the believers during the first half century. This shift towards public proclamation of the authority of Muhammad and the Quran is most marked during the reign of Abdul Malik. But Abdul Malik reigned from 685 to 705, so he was the one that brought it into the 8th century. This clear move to identify Muhammad and his teaching unambiguously as the basis for the faith of the believers adds further reasons for identifying this period as the time when the canonical text of the Quran was produced and proclaimed as the authoritative word of God by the community of believers. Shoemaker continues, Abdul Malik would emerge as the leader of a potent and well-organized state that would be fully capable of achieving what the tradition probably ascribes instead to Uthman. There is near universal agreement from every quarter that Abdul Malik was instrumental in establishing and enforcing the canonical version of the Quran. So what he's saying is, folks, this makes no sense to be talking about a Quran that was written way down in the Hijaz. Because there's nothing there. There's no Christians there. There are no Jews there. You can't have a Quran that's full of confrontation of the Christians and the Jews and their theologies coming in a place where there are no Christians and Jews. In order to have that kind of discussion, that kind of debate, you need to be up north where the Christians and Jews lived. This was happening way up north. And it was Abdul Malik. You have to have a man of stature, a man of importance, a man of authority to really push this. That's why it had to be Abdul Malik. Remember, Uthman and Abu Bakr didn't live up in the north. They lived in Medina, in what was then Yathrib, which only had about 200 people and no Jews and Christians. This could have only happened much later when there were many different derivations. Now, he believes they came from Muhammad. I don't agree with him on that. There was no Muhammad as far as I'm concerned. But there certainly were these texts, and there certainly were these debates, and there certainly were these discussions going up in the north, because that's where the Arabs were having discussions with the Jews and the Christians and the Zoroastrians, all of them, and the Ethiopians and all the rest. They were having that discussion in places like Damascus and in Jerusalem and in Cairo, and also in places like Petra, and also in Kufa, or what was then Ctesiphon today, Baghdad. So this makes sense, but it's happening much further north and much later. Now, Shoemaker says this. The Meccan-Medinan Codex was almost certainly no more than a regional version of the Quran that held authority in Medina and perhaps in Mecca as well. I disagree with that, of course, because he doesn't talk about Mecca. He doesn't understand. Here's what's ironic about Shoemaker. He goes and does a whole chapter showing that there could be no Mecca, and then he goes and says that possibly, perhaps Mecca. So he contradicts himself in this statement. As such, it must be understood as simply another of the so-called companion codices collected independently in Syria and Iraq. Uthman's collection was simply one among many early collections. Robinson, who's from Australia, says this, Abdul Malik had a clear interest. As we shall see, his imperial program was in very large measure executed by broadcasting ideas of order and obedience in a distinctly Islamic idiom. What is more, unlike previous caliphs, Abdul Malik had the resources to attempt such a redaction and to impose the resulting text, which amongst all its competitors, we inherit today. De Premier out of France says this, along with these new codices, he also sent instructions, this is Abdul Malik, sent instructions that all earlier versions of the Quran should be gathered up and destroyed, exactly as Uthman was supposedly to have ordered in the canonical narrative. So really this destruction or this burning of Qurans comes from Abdul Malik. But the later Abbasids redacted back to Uthman in their telling of the story. Shoemaker then chimes in and says this, there is well attested tradition that Al-Hajjaj sent codices containing his newly standardized text of the Quran to the various imperial centers of the Caliphate, Egypt, Damascus, Medina, Mecca, Kufa, and Basra, intending that this version would supplant the local versions that are then in use. Hamdan then continues and says, Al-Hajjaj deputized a committee and charged them with inspecting all the mushafs that were in private ownership and to tear up every mushaf that differed from the new imperial standard. As compensation, the owner was paid 60 dirham. So this is all in the traditions, folk. We get a glimpse of this with Imam Ray mentions this. Al-Amash, whose writing can be found in both Sahih Muslim and Al-Bukhari, has an account by Al-Hajjaj addressing a group of scribes in a speech from a pulpit where he says, compose the Quran as Gabriel composed it, the writing that includes mention of the cow, and the writing that includes mention of the women, and the writing that includes mention of the family of Imran. Isn't that interesting? Shoemaker, then some of these writings, it would appear, even bore names that would ultimately be given to some of the Quran surahs. They're in the Quran today. The cow, that's Surah 2, the women, which is Surah 4, and the family of Imran, which is Surah 3. Material evidence of the cow's circulation as a discrete and independent text has really emerged in the form of a newly identified and soon-to-be published papyrus directly confirming the words of Al-Hajjaj on this report. Much more than that, just read the heresy of the Ishmaelites written by John of Damascus in 730. He talks about this as well. He talks about that this man, Muhammad, has 4 books. The cow, Surah 2, the women, Surah 4, the table, Surah 5, and the camel, Surah nothing. So even the 4 that he's talking about, 3 of them later are introduced into the Quran. One of them is out of the Quran, never has been introduced there. So we have, in this case, you have 4 different Qurans, 4 different books, of which the Quran finally was derived from later on. Shoemaker then says this, the Quranic inscription of the Dome of the Rock, installed by Abd al-Malik, our earliest surviving evidence for the text of the Quran, differ from the now canonical version of the Quran in many places. How can this be if the text of the Quran had already been firmly established already for 40 years since the reign of Uthman? So you can see. So 12 reasons for a later Quranic creation in the turn of the century. Number 1, there is no unanimity in the early Islamic tradition on any Uthmanic authorship. Number 2, the Islamic tradition brings a chaotic contangle of inconsistent traditions concerning Uthman. Number 3, there was no early tradition of the Quran's definitive collection by one of the first 4 caliphs. Number 4, the later Islamic community, the Abbasids, sought to establish an anchor for its text in the person of one of these early authorities in proximity to the life of Muhammad. Number 5, there is considerable evidence that the Noldeke Schwalian paradigm has lived a good life, but now needs to be put to rest. We need to put the standard Islamic narrative on this material to rest. Number 6, the Quran's composition under Abd al-Malik and Al-Hajjaj is attested by the letter of Leo III, which is very close to the event in question. Number 7, the strength of Abd al-Malik's reign, in contrast to his predecessors, makes such an undertaking entirely feasible. Number 8, Abd al-Malik's program of Islamization and Arabization correspond with this time as well. Number 9, it corresponds with the very first witness to the text of the Quran in the inscription to the Dome of the Rock, which was created by himself. He was the one that built the Dome of the Rock. Number 10, why would the later traditions refer to Al-Hajjaj as changing the Quranic text, since he was very cruel and a severe ruler, someone who would not be equated with such a pious memory? Number 11, ascribing a canonical text to more esteemed figures closer to the time of Muhammad would make sense for the later Abbasids, as they needed a narrative which confronted the earlier Umayyad narrative. In other words, they would be the first ones they would not want to give credit to Al-Hajjaj or to Abd al-Malik for the Quran. They would want to go right back to their prophet, Muhammad, and his companions. That's why we have that today. Can you see then why they would have an agenda for doing that? Number 12, François de Roche, the leading scholar in Europe, and there lives in Paris, says through careful paleographical and chronological study has confirmed that the earliest extant Qurans were in fact produced in the imperial chancery during the reign of Abd al-Malik, 685 to 705. Much, much too late to be Uthmanic. Shoemaker then says this, we conclude that the Quran's final composition into the canonical form that has come down to us today seems to have been taken place around the turn of the 8th century under the direction of Caliph Abdul Malik, that's 685 to 705, and his viceroy Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. This tradition not only holds the most consistency with the range of our available evidence, including the gradual development of the caliphal state, but it is also the most broadly attested account of the Quran's origins across the various sources relevant to this question. So that's Quran canon number 3. So number 1 would be Abu Bakr, number 2 would be Uthman, number 3 Abdul Malik. Now we come to 4 through 6. But to understand 4 through 6, 4, 5, and 6, I need to give you an explanation, what we're talking about. And it has to do with what we know today as the Qira'ats. What are the Qira'ats? That lady you see on the left there, that's Hatun Tash, who is my colleague, still is my colleague. She and I became good friends. She was my student in 2012, 2013. I can't remember what day exactly. And she used to come, because she was my student at Oxford, when I was teaching at the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, I had said to the students that if you want to come down to Speaker's Corner, which is only about 45 minutes away, I'm there every Sunday. I get up on a ladder, come and help me out. We'd love to have some help from you all. Well, she started coming, and she loved it so much that she would come every Sunday. So I got a ladder for her and a ladder for myself. We would have 2 ladders next to each other, and we would start working as a team. And I trained her up on how to debate Muslims, how to do this, because sometimes we get 10, sometimes 100 Muslims at a time taking us on. And we have no books, no computers. There were no smartphones back then. Well, there were smartphones, but we didn't have them in our hands to use. And so we would just go at it. And she went to, while she was there in about 2030, she went down to North Africa. And while she was there in North Africa, she wanted to get a Quran in Arabic. She doesn't speak Arabic herself. So she went into the bookstore and asked for a Quran. And the guy behind the counter says, well, which Quran do you want? We have over here, we have Hafs, we have Warsh, we have Qalun, we have Kisai, we have Ibn Kathir. She said, what are you talking about? She said, there's only one Quran. He says, oh, no. Well, which one are you going to memorize? Depends on which one you memorize. She said, well, give them all to me. So she brought them back to London. I looked at them and I started laughing because I knew exactly what these were about, but I had no idea that you could still get them. These are known as qira'ats, readings, different readings in Arabic. These are not translations. These are Arabic Qurans. Every one of them is a different Quran. If you look up there, I have 9 of them sitting up on my shelf right up there. Those are the qira'ats. Those are 9 that I have been able to buy. Well, she said, well, how many are there? I said, well, let's see. There's the first 7, and then you have the next 14, and then you have the next 3, and then you have the next 6. That makes a total of 30. There should be 30 of them. So she started going all over. She went to Yemen and to Oman. She went to Jordan, and she went to Morocco, and then she would send friends who would ever go to these countries. I need this Quran and this Quran, because you can go up on Wikipedia. You can find the names of all these 30 Qurans. They're all there. Just go and put Qira'at in Wikipedia. You can see them all 30 of them. And she was able to come up with 26 of them that she bought herself. And so we decided to take these down to Speaker's Corner in 2016 and hold them up for the whole world to see. Because every Muslim has told us there's only one Quran, no word, no letter has been changed. So we said, okay, what about these Qurans? Every one of them is in Arabic, and there are thousands of changes between them. Not just 1 or 2, thousands. So we held them up. Look and see what happened. This is in June of 2016. Look and see what happened when we held them up.
There is only one Quran, right? And that every Quran in the world is the same. That's what you've been told. You have been told a lie. Okay, so there are 2 Qurans today, right? 2. More than 2? Oh, more than 3, 4 Qurans? 26 different Qurans. Oh, go ahead, start going. By the time you get keep going.
Okay, so this all happened in June of 2016. That was the first time we held it up these Qurans up two more times that summer. And if you look carefully, as we're holding them up, there is this guy here on the right. His name is Muhammad Hijab. Many of you know who he is. He's well known all over the internet, probably one of the strongest Muslim polemicists on the internet today on YouTube. He has a following of possibly 500,000. And he was there at the corner to film us. He didn't know what we were going to do, but he saw immediately that there was a problem here. So as you can see on the right there, he goes outside the crowd and he calls all the Muslims to him. Come to me, come to me. And what he said to them is, don't look at what they're showing you. Don't listen to what they're saying. I'll explain it. That happened in 2016. Well, obviously, he didn't know how to explain it. He'd never seen these before. He didn't know about this. He knew nothing about these Qur'ans. No one had told him. And yet he's one of the top clerics there on the internet. So about 4 years later, now we're in 2020, June 8th, he decides he needs help. And so he does an interview with this man here, Dr. Yasir Qadhi. That's Muhammad Hijab, a little bit heavier on the left. And there is Yasir Qadhi, and he has a YouTube interview with him, which is about an hour and a half long. But the last 28 minutes is where all the damage was done. I was told that this interview is going to happen on both their sites. So I saw this live. This was going on June 8th. We're talking about 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. And the first thing he did, I'm just going to summarize it because it would take too long, and we don't have 28 minutes to go into it. But he put out his hand and he said, okay, this is a blank sheet of paper. Which Quran, which one of these 30 is the one that's from heaven? Which is the one that's preserved? Which is the one that was sent down by Jibril to Muhammad over a 22-year period? Which is the Quran that Muhammad received that Uthman wrote down? Now, Yasir Qadhi, who is Yasir Qadhi? Dr. Yasir Qadhi got his doctorate at Yale University in 1995 on this material. At Yale University. He's from Houston, Texas, though he's from Pakistan. So he has an American accent, speaks Arabic, memorized the entire Quran. One of the leading clerics in the world today on the Quran. And of course, on this area. That's why Muhammad Hijab, who's there in London, is asking this question. And Yasir Qadhi said, don't ask me this question. We don't talk about this in public. Turn off your camera, he says. But he goes on. And what he says is, the Afra and the Kiraf is the most difficult topics for scholars today. You don't tell new converts about the Qur'an. Qur'an means readings. Ahruf also readings. Only with the more advanced students do you do a deep dive, he said, on this issue. Come afterwards, he told, come afterwards and I'll tell you about it, but not here, not on camera. And he said, for the last 1,000 years, this problem has not been solved. We don't know what to do with this. We have no idea what we're going to do with this. He goes on and says, Muslims, the reason why is Muslims, we have a perfect respect for the Quran. There's a red line beyond which we don't go. Unlike here in the West, unlike Yale University, where back in 1995, when he was there, there are no red lines at Yale University. And so suddenly he was introduced to stuff he'd never heard about before. There are no red lines here in the West. He points to Muhammad Hijab, you in the East, Muhammad's living in London, you in the East, your standard narrative has holes in it. That's where that phrase comes from. It comes from Dr. Yasir Qadhi there in the blue shirt there. Your standard narrative. What standard narrative? Standard Islamic narrative. S-I-N. We love it. That's why we're running with it. Your standard narrative has holes in it, he said. And then he went on to say, the Western academics here in the West, where I have to live in Houston and at Yale, they have jumped huge leaps and bounds in the last 100 years. They've come much further than we have come. And they're looking at us, those of us Muslims in the East, like the emperor with no clothes. They're laughing at us, basically, is what he was saying. He says, for the last 25 years, I have never lectured on this subject, nor will I ever do it. Though I have a doctorate in it, I'm not lecturing on it. You will never see me come and take my class. Well, why would you want to take a class if he's not going to lecture on it? This subject should never be brought up in public, he said. Well, this was not good enough for Muhammad Hijab. He was furious. He was getting really antsy. So he put out his hand and he put it out again. Which one? Now, come on, you've got to tell me. Is it Hafs? Is it Warsh? Is it Qalun? Is it Kasa? And Yasir Khan said, don't ask me which should be written on it. But finally, he had to give in. And finally, at the very end, after 28 minutes, he finally said, they are all the Quran. And so Muhammad said, you mean a little bit of Hafs? You keep some of it? Yes, some of Hafs, some of Warsh, some of Qalun. You just mix them all up. And that's the Quran they have there. They are all the Quran. I started clapping when I saw this. And so every year on June 8th, I bring it back up again, because within 2 weeks, the comments at the bottom of this video that was on both their sites, there were hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of Muslims who were saying, I have now left Islam because you are the ones that have said there's not one word, not one letter, not one harf, not one dot has been changed. And now you're saying there's hundreds of different Qurans, hundreds. And he didn't even know what we now know, as I'm going to show you. There's not just 1 or 2 different changes. There's over 93,000 different changes. So he was saying this right there in public. Now, after 2 weeks of all these Muslims saying we are leaving Islam and my blood is going to be on your shoulder, Dr. Qasar Yasir Qadi, on your shoulder, Muhammad Hijab, they had to stop the comments. They deleted all the comments. Within 2 months, by August of 2020, they had to delete that interview from both their sites. And it's no longer there. But I have it. And you can have it. I can give it to all of you. I think, Korede, you have it. David Wood has it. Hatun has it. Many of us have it. I've given it to all my students because we want to make sure that this is preserved for the whole world to see. This destroyed the preservation of the Quran in one fell swoop. Just one interview. Muhammad, which Quran is in heaven, Qadi? You don't ask this question in public, and certainly not on camera. Ask me afterwards. I had a guy put this together for me. The Ahruf and the Qira problem is the greatest problem in the last 1,000 years, and only advanced students can do a deep dive with me. So just take my class. Afterwards, we can talk about it. We in Islam, we have a respect for the Quran, and we put a red line beyond which we don't go. But of course, Western academics, they go beyond any red line. There are no red lines. And they're looking at us after going leaps and bounds as your standard narrative has holes in it. So they are all the Quran, he finally admits. This is his final conclusion. Every one of the 30, you can swim in them. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Take them all as your Quran. So what exactly are the Qur'an? What are we talking about? So let's do a quick historical overview of where the Qur'an came from. Now, Arabic, which is used today, it was not the Arabic of the 7th century. In Mecca, Medina especially, we don't even know of any Arabic that far south. There was. But the problem is the Arabic in what we know as central part of Arabia was not the Arabic that we have in the Quran. The Arabic we have in the Quran is the Nabatean Aramaic. It has the Tar Marbuta, has the Alif Maksura, it has the definite article. That did not exist in the Arabic that was used in Medina, in Mecca, because the Arabic was Sabaic Arabic. Today's current Arabic has 28 letters. They only had 16 back then. So 7th century Nabatean Aramaic had 16 consonantal letters known as rasm. Obviously, this caused a problem in understanding what was being written. A single consonantal letter could be pronounced 8 different ways, depending on where you put the dots and vowels today. Thus, in the 8th century, they had to create these dots called ijams and these vowels called haraka, and were added to the script to help Muslims read it. So there, take a look. This is what I'm talking about. Here is 2 pages of two different era manuscripts, two of the earliest manuscripts. You have the Samarkand, which is on the left, and you have the Sana manuscript, which is on the right. And notice there's no dots above the line or below. Notice there's no dots on any of them. There also is no slash above them. That'd be a fatha. There is no slash below them. That'd be a kasra, the e sound. And there's no curlicue above them. That would be the dhamma, the u, the a, the e, the u. Those, you don't see any vowels on any of these manuscripts because they did not exist when these manuscripts were created. In the 8th century, they still didn't exist. They didn't have them in the 8th century. And these are both 8th century manuscripts. So here is the problem. Today we have 28 letters. There's the 28 letters in Arabic, modern standard Arabic. But 6 of those letters don't need any dots. All the rest of the other ones do. The aleph doesn't, the kaf doesn't, the lam, the mim, the ha, and the waw. Those 6 don't need letters, okay? I'm sorry, those 6 don't need dots. The other 22 letters need dots to distinguish between them, all right? So what are we talking about? Well, most letters are just a little bold shape, like a smile, all right? So when you put 1 dot above it, it makes a na or an n. 2 dots above it make a ta or a t. 3 dots above it make a tha or a th. 1 dot below it makes a ba or a b. And 2 dots below it make a y or a ya. Na, ta, tha, ba, ya. You can see that all those 5 dots are needed. And they were all created in the 8th, canonized in the 9th. So on top of the dots, you then have 3 vowels. A circle and a tail, like you see on the left there, is a dhamma, that's the u sound. A slash below the letter is a kasra, that's the e sound. And then a slash above the letter is a fatha, which is a ah. So u, e, and ah. Those 3 vowels then were created in the 8th and 9th century. Thus, with these 3 signs, 2 above and 1 below, you can write the 3 vowels used in every word in Arabic to pronounce them correctly. But either taking away or putting in the vowels, or taking away or putting dots up and down below the line, with just 3 of those smiley faces put together, you can get 19 different words. And that was the dilemma in the 7th century. What were you reading? No one could read them. That's why they had to invent the harakat and the ijams, the vowels and the dots. So now we come to the 10th century. The 8th and 9th century, when these dots and vowels were being invented, you had many people who were creating their own Qur'ans, putting the dots and vowels where they wanted to. So many show that you had a real problem here. By the 10th century, so many people were putting their dots and vowels where they wanted to, that according to Dr. Shadi Nasser, there were about maybe 700 different Qur'ans that existed by the 10th century. That caused a crisis. So the caliph at that time told Ibn Mujahid, who is a scholar who died in 936, so just before he died, to choose 7. And those are the 7 there you see that I've listed. Nafi from Medina, Ibn Kathir from Mecca, Abu Amr from Basra, Ibn Amir from Damascus, Asim from Kufa, Hamza from Kufa, and Al-Kisai from Kufa. Those are the first 7. Those are the first 7 that Muslims say Muhammad received from Jibril before he died in 632. Take a look. Did those 7 exist? They were written by those 7. Did they exist in 632? No. Look when they died. Look at their dates. 785, 738, 770, 736, 745, 772, 805. None of these guys knew Muhammad. They didn't even live in the same century Muhammad lived in. Can you see a problem there? So this cannot be those 7 that Muslims say Muhammad received from Jibril. These are 7 other men who lived, and look at where they lived. 3 of them in Kufa, 1 in Damascus, 1 in Basra, and 1 in Mecca, and 1 in Medina. So Muhammad was not in Basra nor Damascus, and he certainly was not in Kufa. Mecca, Medina, yes, that's about the only place. So he would not even know these men, to say nothing of the fact he didn't live in their cities, and to say nothing of the fact he didn't live at their time. They all lived 100 years or later after him. But what about this one here? This is the official Quran. This is the Quran we all use today. This is called the Hafs Nasim Quran. Hafs, to be short. This is the Hafs Quran. Do you see it on that list? No, it's not even on that list. If this is the official one that we all use today, why is it not on that list? Ooh, So this is the first. This is now number 4. This is canon number 4. You get these 7. But you need to get this one, right? You need to get this one. So another guy was Shatabi was his name. He was given the commission to go ahead and come up with another canon. So this is canon number 5. Now look at the date, 1194. So the 12th century, he had to choose 2 students, riwayats, we know them, rawis, plural. A riwayat is a reader from each one of those 7. So he decided to choose 2. Let's put them up there. So 2 from Nafi, Kalun, and Warish, 2 from Ibn Kathir, Al-Bazi, and Kumbul. Coming on down to Asim, number 5, from Kufa, he chose 2 from him, Shuba and Hafs. Ooh, so there is Hafs. Hafs now appears, and he is nothing more than a student of Asim, Ibn Abi al-Najud from Kufa. He lived with Asim. But look at the date he died, 796. He lived in Kufa, which is in Iraq today. Did he know Muhammad? No, he did not. Did he even live in the same century Muhammad? No, he did not. So therefore, did he even live where Muhammad lived? No, he did not. Can you see, coming and going, Muslims have a real problem. How are they going to deal with this? How would you deal with this? This is hugely damaging. But that's still not enough. So now we have 7 plus 20, 7 plus 14 equaled 20. Now we have 20 different Qurans. Then in the 15th century, there's Hafs there. Then in the 15th century, we then get another scholar. I see. I want to put up the timeline here. So those are the 7. And then here comes the other 2 for each one of them. Notice where I'm putting them on a timeline. Notice they are all after the first 7 because they're all students of the first 7. And they are chosen in the 12th century. That's about 300 years. No, sorry, this is about 500 years after Muhammad, if Muhammad even existed. There's Hafs there. There's Warsh, the 2 most popular ones today. Hafs is the one this, I have my hand here. 93% of the Muslims today now memorize this Quran. Warsh is memorized in North Africa. But I want to put Abdul Malik and Abbasids because all of these come after Abdul Malik and they all come during the Abbasid period. So these are all Abbasid Qurans. These are not Umayyad Qurans. This has nothing to do with Uthman. This has nothing to do with Abdul Malik. This has nothing to do with Al-Hajjaj. These are all Abbasid Qurans. That's why these are not part of the first 3 canons. This is now the 4th canon. 4th canon would be Ibn Mujahid. And now we're moving into the 5th canon, which is Al-Shatibi. And then we'll go into the 6th canon, which is Al-Jazari. Because these 20 are still not good enough. Al-Jazari comes in the 15th century, 800 years later, and he introduces 3 more. Now remember, there's the first 7, here's the next 20. He introduces 3 more of these qira'ats, and each one of those qira'ats has to have 2 students of riwayats. That's Ibn Wardan, Ruwais, Ishaq, Jumaz, Rao, and Idris. So that means another 6. So now you have 7 plus 14 plus 3 plus 6. You now have 30 different Qurans. All by the 15th century, all within 800 years. There's Hafs. Now, how many differences of letters or words would you find between Hafs and the other 29? You want to find out? 93,263 differences. That's what we found in London just by looking at them. Today, we now have found out that it's now over 100,000, over 100,000 different words. Anytime you have a different word, you have a different meaning. Anytime you have a different meaning, you have a different theology. I'll show you that. We'll get into that. But just so you know, 93,000 differences. Now, only 10 qira'ats. Now remember, only 10 qira'ats. There they are. Those are the 10. 1, 2, 3 from Ibn Mujahid, and then 3 from Al-Jazari. These 10 are known as the creme de la creme, best of the best, according to Dr. Yasir Qadi and all the Muslim scholars. They are the 10 original. Obviously, Hafs is not there, and Warsh is not there. Note, it took almost 800 years to choose these 10. Neither Hafs and Warsh are in this group of qira'ats, the readers. So how many differences are? Well, this is a graph that Hutton put together. We need to find out, if you look at Hafs, which is down here that I've circled in black, and you compare them all with the others, you can see there's 1,000 differences between Al-Bazi and hers. Coming on down to Khalad, 7,000 differences between hers and Hafs. 5,000 between Abu Ali al-Harith and Hafs. So you can see there are thousands of differences. Now that's timeline from chapter 4, canons number 4 through 6. There they are. There's the first 7. There's the next 14, then you have the next 3, and you have the next 6. So that is all of them. Those are all 30. When you look at Ibn Ishaq, who supposedly wrote down Muhammad's life, that was really written by Ibn Hisham. Let's take Ibn Ishaq out of the way. And that's those are the Sirah. Then you get Ibn Hisham, and those are the Hadith. Notice that most of these all come during the Abbasid period, and they all come after Abd al-Malik. 44 years is when they first start to appear after Abd al-Malik, and 140 years before Ibn Hisham, who writes down and writes about this. That's why when you look at these 23, you can see these are all written long after Muhammad, about 200 years after Muhammad. Those are 23 that my good friend Bernie Power has, but here are the 26 that Hatun Tash had. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. She had 27 in that one here. Now she has 37. This is the latest picture she sent me. 37 qira'at. She is now pound 37. You're going to see why. I'm going to say something a little later. Now, were there more than 30? Yes, there were more than 30. Here's the conundrum. If you have the first 10 and then you have the 20 narrators, which makes 30, well, there were more than that, many, many more. According to Dr. Yasser Nasi, Dr. Hekmah Shadi Nasser, he says between the time of the initial 8th century, Ibn Amir and Damascus created a Qira'at Quran in the 10th century when the original 7 readers were appointed by Ibn Mujahid. We have an intervening 200 years. In those 200 years, there were many other transmitters known as Rawis. In fact, so many that it became a crisis, forcing al-Shatibi to appoint just 2 transmitters for each of the 10 canonical readers. Let's review. There's the 30, right? Now we find that there were other scholars beside Ibn Mujahid. Remember, Ibn Mujahid was commissioned to choose the first 7 in 936. Then you have Al-Dani in 1053. So that's about 100 years later. He had a separate list of rawis or transmitters. 4 for Nafi, 3 for Ibn Kathir, 2 for Abu Amr, 5 rawis or readers for Ibn Amir, 4 rawis for Asim, 1 rawi for Hamza, 5 rawis or students for Al-Kisai. That's a total of 24 rawis, narrators. You see a problem there, folks. Not 14, but 24. That's 10 more than Ibn Mujahid had. But even he is not another. Here's another scholar. Abu Ali al-Maliki in 1046, he also had a different list. 4 for Nafi, 2 for Kathir, 3 for Abu Amr, 2 rawis or readers or students for Ibn Amir, another 2 students for Asim, 4 for Hamza, 8 for Al-Kisai, the first 7. That's 25 rawis or narrators. That's 11 more than Ibn Mujahid. However, how do they choose their canonical rawis? Well, I would have thought that they would open it up and they would just read the text, usually by who had the largest number of students. That's how they choose them. Now, that's not how you do textual criticism. It has nothing to do with popularity. If it has to do with it, it has to do with which text is closest to the original or which is the least deviant, as we do with the biblical textual critical analysis. We always look at later texts and delineate which of these later texts were exactly like the former. That was not done at all with these rawis. Their only concern was how many students they had who followed in their line, and whether any of the lines were single strands, which were then thrown out if they were. How do we know if any of the rawis between the 8th and 10th century had anything comparable to the readers they associated with? Did they always choose the most popular? No. You have one case where the Warsh was chosen because he lived in Egypt. Had nothing to do with popularity, it had to do with his geography. So that's why they chose him. Now, how many are we talking about? 20 or 30? Let's see what Nasser tells us. Here is the qira'ats between Ibn Kathir and Ibn Mujahid, who chose him. Notice, how many different rawis did he have? Well, he chose these 2 here, Bazi and Kunbul. How many rawis did he have to go? He had 59 different qira'ats or rawis that he could have chosen, all written down. Now, the qira'ats between Nafi and Medina, there is Nafi, here is Al-Mujahid, and there he had Kalun and Warsh. But the different qira'at rawis or Qur'ans were all written down. Notice he had 63. He threw out 61 and chose 2. Now we come to Abu Amr. There's Abu Amr up there, 770 in Ibn Mujahid, 936. He chose Al-Duri and Al-Susi, but they had 65 different qira'ats or rawis to choose from, all written down. Get us between Asim and well, now this is the major load. This is the guy that chose Hafs. He is the one that chose Shuba and Hafs. Those are the two he chose there. How many did he have? He had 91 different Qurans, 91 different Rawis, all written down. Conclusion? Get us between Ibn Kathir and Mecca, where you have Nafi with 63, you have Ibn Kathir with 59, you have Abu Amr with 65, you have Asim with 91. That's just with 4 of them, total of 278, where the average of 4 for the 4 would be a 70. Of the 10, that would be 70 times 10, that would be 700 different written Qurans, 700 different Rawis. Can you see why this is a problem, folks? And when you look at some of the variants, you can see why. Every one of these 93,000 variants. Here's chapter 3, verse 146. Qatala is on the Hafs, the Warsh, it's Kutila. One says, and how many a prophet fought, with whom were many different worshippers? And the Warsh says, and how many prophets were killed? Now, did the prophets fight or were they killed? If I'm a prophet, I would rather fight than be killed, thank you. That would have a huge difference for me. Here's chapter 43, verse 19. On the Hafs, it's Ibadu. On the right, it's Inda. Slaves or in the presence. And they make the angels who are slaves of the beneficent females. Now, are the angels slaves of Allah like Hafs have, or are they simply in the presence of Allah? Is it slaves or those in Allah's presence who are made females? If I were an angel, I would prefer being in God's presence than his slave. Now, if I were an angel, I prefer also if the slaves were made females, thank you, because I'm a male. So you can see that has coming and going, that has problems. Chapter 46, verse 15. Hafs has Isana, doing good. Al-Duri has beauty for Husnan. So in the translation, and we enjoined on man doing good to his parents for Hafs. Al-Duri has, and we have enjoined on man beauty to his parents. Are men supposed to do good or be beautiful to their parents? According to, as a parent myself, I have 3 sons. I would prefer my sons be good than good looking. And this is one of the more damaging ones, chapter 98, verse 6. Bariati versus Bariati. On the one side, indeed, they who disbelieve among the people of scriptures, that's us, and the polytheists, will be in the fire of hell, abiding eternally therein. Those are the worst of creatures. But in the worst, they are the worst of the innocent. So are we Christians the worst of creatures, or are we innocent? And what if we're innocent, what in the world are we doing in hell? So you can see that has theological problems, has doctrinal problems. And for those of us who are Christian, all of us are, it would have huge problems for us. Now, we come finally to the last canon. This is the 1924 AD canon. Back in Cairo, 100 years ago, they were having problem with standardized tests for high school students, just in Cairo, in the city of Cairo. And they were putting out tests there on the Quran, and the students were coming with 30 different answers because there were 30 different canonical texts that they could choose from. They didn't know how to do standardized tests this way. How do you grade that? So they went to Al-Azhar University there in Cairo, and they asked a scholar there named Muhammad ibn Ali Haluzani al-Haddad to choose just one. And of course, he chose this one here, the Hafs text. This is the one he chose in 1924. What did they do with the other 29? They took them out by boat into the Nile and dumped them into the Nile River. Little did they know, thinking that could get rid of them, they did not know that you can still buy them today. There are the ones you can buy today. Hatun has bought 37 of them. So I have 3 problems with Hafs. He was not trustworthy and therefore not suitable. He wasn't chosen for textual veracity or authenticity. He should have been the last person amongst the 30 to have been chosen. I'll go through this real quickly. Before we get to Hafs, we need to look to Asim. Asim was the guy that was the Kirat, was his scholar, was his teacher. According to Ibn Sa'd, Asim was liable, but made mistakes in the transmission. Ahmad said that Al-Amas memorized more correctly than Asim. Sufyan said his transmission of the tradition contained some confusion. Ulaya, everyone named Asim was faulty in memorizing the tradition. Ibn Qurash said about Asim, his transmission of the tradition contained some deniable things. Al-Ukaili said he had no problem except poor memorization of the tradition. And Darakutni said Asim had a faulty memory. Salma said Asim became confused toward the end of his life. So even his teacher was not well respected. Now, what about Hafs himself? Hafs lives with Asim, and then Hafs himself said that he tried not to depart from Asim's reading, but Al-Dhahabi said Hafs was reliable in his reading, consistent and accurate, but not so in the transmission of his tradition. Hatim says his transmission of the tradition was rejected. Al-Darimi says he was not reliable. Al-Madini says he was weak in tradition, and I intentionally avoided him. Al-Buhari, Sahih Buhari, says he rejected from the compilers of the dictionaries. And Al-Nasai says, I consider him untrustworthy, and the traditions he transmitted were not recorded. Others like Durakutni said he declared him weak. Al-Sajji said Hafs, one of those traditions, have disappeared. What he transmitted contained objectionable traditions. Sahih bin Muhammad said his traditions were not recorded, and all of them were objectionable. Ibn Kharash says he was a liar, was rejected for fabricated traditions. Hayyan says he used to change the chain of transmission and even fabricated change for those traditions that did not have ones. And therefore, conclusions. Notice what did they all say about Hafs, the one who now was chosen as the official one. He was unreliable, weak, untrustworthy, contained objectionable material, contained fabricated change. His traditions disappeared. He was a liar. He was not recorded by others. Others avoided him, to the point that Abdul al-Rahman al-Mundi says this: I solemnly declare that it is not permissible to transfer traditions on Hafs' authority. So why was Hafs chosen as the official Quran if he was so unreliable and trustworthy? So which Hafs? Here, Hatun has found 7 different Hafs traditions. These were 7 different renditions between 1924 and 1936. The Egyptian government found so many problems with the 1924 one that they had to keep on revising and revising and revising it 7 times until they finally got to 1936 and made it official in 1936. That was known as the Farouk edition. That became the one that was now the official tradition for all of Egypt, not just for Cairo. That became so successful that in 1985, the Saudi government realized that they needed to do something, so they made the Hafs edition, known as the Fad edition, the Hafs Quran, as the official Quran for all of the world. But here, hold on a minute. The Hafs, why would they have chosen the Hafs? Remember back when I talked about Al-Buhari, volume 6, hadith number 510? Remember when Uthman was given by Zayd ibn Thabit this official Quran known as the Qurayshi Quran that was there from Medina? And then he took all the other Qurans and he burned them. Remember that? We talked about him burned them. Where were these other Qurans from? They were from Basra, Kufa, and Damascus, right? So if he burned them, then why in the world is a Saudi Arabian government? I'll take a look. These are the readers who would have the Qurayshi dialect. Notice that. Look at these according to the 10 qirats. How many of them came from Mecca, Medina? Well, let's count them. Ibn Kathir, Abu Ja'far, and the first one. And how many of them were the 10 readers were Qurayshi? Take a look. 3 of the 10 readers were Qurayshi. Note, of the 20 transmitters, the riwayats, only 5 out of the 20 were from the Qurayshi dialect. Thus, of the 30 official qira'ats and the riwayats, only 8 used the Qurayshi dialect. The other 22, including Hafs, including Warsh, the 2 most important, they were not the Qurayshi dialect. They were the ones that Uthman burned. So why did the Saudi Arabian government choose that one? Conclusion. Hafs was unreliable, weak, untrustworthy, and a liar, and objectionable material and fabricated change so that others avoided him and refused to use him. He was initially chosen in order to standardize high school exams on the Quran. He was chosen for political purposes. That's why the Ottomans had chosen him. That's why Al-Haddad chose him. He was chosen by the Saudi Arabian government only 37 years ago out of expediency. Yet why did the Arabian government choose an Iraqi dialect? Why didn't they choose one from their own locale? Nowhere in this whole process did anyone use textual criticism, whether Hafs' text was similar or even close to the original Uthmanic Qurayshi text. And the reason? The Qurans had nothing to do with any original Musafs, but all to do with recitations. Besides, there was no Uthmanic Qurayshi manuscript from which to compare with. They still aren't even today. There is none. So let's now end this off. I've got an hour and 43 minutes. Let's now finish this off. Muslims have no index of understanding a canonical text because theirs, they believe, is eternal, and therefore cannot be created or collated or corrected or canonized by any group of men. Muslims say there is only one canon of the Quran, while scholars say there are 5, but I believe there are 7. Canon number 1, Abu Bakr, in 632, was not good enough, as it only lasted 20 years, hidden under the bed of one of the wives of Muhammad named Hafsa, allowing others to create their own. Canon number 2 was Uthman's in 652, had to be created to eradicate the other Iraqi and Syrian deviant texts, which were not due to dialectical differences, but had to do with consonantal textual variants. That means razm, that means consonantal text. Canon number 3, Abdul Malik's in 705, is probably the real Uthmanic recension because the manuscript evidence suggests much later creations for the Quranic codices. Canon number 4, Ibn Mujahid's in 936, with 7 qira'ats, was created due to the plethora of derivations. That means adding the 5 and dots and 3 vowels, so that you had almost as many as 700 Qur'ans at that time. That's why he had to choose the first 7. Canon number 5, then, sorry, let's go back. Al-Shatibi's in 1194, with 14 additions, were needed to alleviate the numerous up to 700 additional Qur'ans and also provide the most popular Qur'ans we have today, the Hafs and the Asim. Canon number 6, Al-Jazari's in 1429, 800 years after Muhammad, with another 3 qira'ats and 6 riwayats added out of deference to his scholarship and the desire to accommodate the popular memorized text, giving a total of 30 Qur'ans. And then canon number 7, Muhammad ibn Ali al-Husaini al-Haddad's 1924 AD canon was reduced to just 1, the Hafs and Asim, riwayat, in order to standardize high school tests, which were made official for the whole world in 1985. Note, all 7 canons that I've gone through, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, were made by one man each, and not by any theological scholars. Nor were they made without looking at one text. They didn't open up one book to get that canon. They were all chosen due to number 1, popularity, who is the most popular, and geography. Where did that person come from? Like what? Coming from Cairo. Conclusion, when Muslims claim that they have only one Quran, remind them that they have 30 official Qurans, canonized in 7 different periods by 7 different men, none of whom ever saw or heard Muhammad or ever looked at one page of his Quran. Now, finally, from what we have researched and found today, we can say, number 1, the Quran was not created by God at all. The Quran was not sent down to Muhammad between 610 and 632. The Quran was not complete by Uthman in 652. The Quran was changed in the last 1,300 years. Notice I'm saying 1,300, not 1,400. There is no 1,400 Quran. The Quran was finally compiled in 1924, made official in 1985. Thus, the Quran is a mere, hold on a minute, only 39 years old. Many of us who are listening here today are older than the Quran. Okay, that's where we stop today. I'm sure there are some questions. Koredi, do you want me to do questions? How are we doing with time? You're muted.
Oh yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. J. First of all, I want to appreciate you for this. This is supposed to be for 1 hour, but we've done almost 2 hours. This is a master class.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
it's my PowerPoint, and it's a long PowerPoint.
Thank you so much for this. Now, looking at the comment section, so what we have right there is not much of a question. I think it's just a couple of comments right from folks, and some of them were actually asking if they will have a link to the interview Yasakadi had with Mohammed Ijab, and I told them that they will have it. In fact, the link has been sent to them already, so they'll be able to take a look at that. But aside that, one other question that we have right there. Okay, 2 questions. Two persons are actually asking the question. Can we get a PowerPoint? That's what they're asking. Okay, so they're asking if they could get a PowerPoint. So
what I'll do is I'll send it to you tonight. In fact, after I get off, I'll send it to you. Korede, you'll have the PowerPoint. I'll also send you the recording. I'll put it up on Vimeo, and you can then send out. What I'll do is I'll create a Vimeo, and I'll send like we do with our MAPI course. I'll send you with each one of the PowerPoint and the recording. And also they can download it at their own leisure, the interview between Yasar Qadi and Muhammad Hijab.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Dr. J. And then here's the question again. Pastor Kudur is asking the question that do you have the link to the 26 Arabic Quran? He's asking if you have the link to the 26 Arabic Quran.
You cannot buy 26 Arabic Qurans. I can only get 9, and that's Al-Quran Online, ALQURANONLINE. Al-Quran Online is where I got mine. You have to go
Exactly.
physically. You have to go physically to buy them in bookshops, like what Hatun had to do. You have to go to places like Morocco and Yemen and Oman and Jordan. They're not online. They're all being printed because they're all printed in areas where people will memorize them. So you only print the one that you memorize in your area. Therefore, there's no reason to put them online for people who are not, and only maybe one group of people will buy one Quran, so it's not worthy for them to print massive, huge. And they only really what the Saudi Arabian government's trying to do is to get rid of all the other Qurans, all 29, and just make this the official Quran, so everybody memorizes this. That's why 93% of the world's population now memorize this. The only reason that we have the other 29 is because Hatun quickly went and got them, because I imagine now the Muslims are destroying them all. So it's just a matter of time before there will only be the Hafs text. So that's why if you have a chance, you're in Jordan or you're in Morocco or you're in Oman, if you go into the bookstores that are behind the mosques, the old mosques, go into the bookstores. And if any of you understand Arabic, even there in Nigeria, look for them, because look at my PowerPoint and you can see the 30 names up there. Go and try to find as many as you can get, because I'm sure you have different copies there in Nigeria as well.
Yeah, actually, Dr. J, we do not have much of it in Nigeria. I think for the most part, the one we could get in Nigeria is apps, and if you're lucky, you can get Warash, like the ones I have on the shelf right here. This was actually gotten from Al Quran Online. That's from the US. So we don't have them in Nigeria. So that's the reason why folks are actually asking. And then Fatu Guru is asking again about the video of the display of the Quran in the speaker's corner. Is asking how you could get it. I actually have the video, so I would actually send it to
it's going to be incorporated it's incorporated into this recording.
Oh, beautiful. All right, so I think
once you get this recording, it includes the video with it.
Exactly. Okay, so I think that's all the question that we have. Okay, somebody is asking. Okay, yeah, bro, McIntyre is asking a question. It says, I want to use this opportunity to remind Dr. J that we're here to get the slides and video on the historical narrative of Islam and the lies within and the lies hidden there plus. Okay, and the lies hidden there plus the historical narrative. Oh, sorry, I thought I actually gave that out. I have already sent a link out, Bramakiwa, to to the PowerPoint. I sent a link out. So if you have not gotten it, please just send me a message on WhatsApp. I will also send it to you again. Yeah, I've actually sent a link out concerning that. Okay, so I think that's the only question. That's the last question that we have right here. I don't know if there's another question. The one we did, yes, the one in Lagos. Yeah, the one in Lagos and then Abuja. Yeah. So okay, so I think that's about the only question here again. So folks, we're gonna be. I know that we usually do this for 1 hour, but this is actually worth it. You can see that the information right here is so much and is in depth. All right, it is not on the peripheral. It's actually in depth, and I know that it will take some of you a couple of maybe days or months to be able to assimilate all that you've actually learned tonight. But the reason why we're doing all of this is to make sure that we are equipped, and Dr. J is actually here to do that for us. We're equipped so that we can engage our Muslim friends. Now, take a look at all that you've had right here. How many of a Muslim friend knows about this? You can bet that 1%, maybe just 1% of them know about it, and those are the scholars. So the average Muslims on the street do not know about this, and that is the reason why we should engage them with this information. Because once we begin to give this out to them, I mean, this whole idea of the Quran is preserved, there's only one, everything comes crashing down. Yeah. And once they realize that this is all lies, the gospel penetrates into their heart. So the essence again of doing this is not because we just want to be overloaded with information. We want to have this information so that we can reach out to our Muslim friends with this information. And again, we are so thankful to Dr. J, who actually made this available. Now, Dr. J was quoting from Creating the Quran. Yes, this is the book Dr. J was creating from, and was quoting from. And again, I'm so grateful to Dr. J. This is a copy from Dr. J. Dr. J, thank you very much. God bless you. We really appreciate this. Okay, so I think that would be, all for now. And I'm not seeing any question here again. That should be all for now. And again, we're so appreciative of your time, Dr. J. And we'll be looking forward to having you in Nigeria again this year, Lord willing, anytime you do be available. So we're going to be closing with prayers right now, and I want to call on Adebra Bramakinwa to close us with prayers, and then we're going to call it a day. Bramakinwa, can you please close us up with prayers? Thank you. Oh, I think I need to. Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Okay, shall we pray? Our Lord and our God, we thank you for the privilege given to us tonight. Thank you for the speaker, Dr. J. Smith. Thank you for Uncle Korede. Thank you for everyone that have made it to this meeting. Be exalted in the name of Jesus. Lord, we ask that these informations, they will not just be informations loaded in our memory, but they will become power tools. They will become weapons by which we'll be able to bring as many as possible into your kingdom in the name of Jesus. Father, by these informations, we ask that you will anoint us with passion, with zeal, with power from within, and we will deliver men from the pit of deception, from the pit of darkness, and usher them into the kingdom of your dear Son. Thank you, Father. In Jesus' name, we have prayed.
Amen. Thank you very much. God bless. All right. Again, Dr. J, we are so grateful. Do you want to say anything, Dr. J, before we officially?
No, it's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.
All right. All right. Thank you again. God bless you. So officially, men and brethren, we officially close right now, and we are done for today. Thank you very much. God bless.
Dr. J, we love you. Thank you so much, sir. God bless you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right.